Everyone. We are back with another installment of our Titans Table Talks. I am Dr. Catherine Ward. I am serving as the Director of Engagement and Learning for the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Programs here at Cal State Fullerton. We are here with our partners to share in a dialogue that is brought to you by our office, DIEP, the President's Office, Alumni Engagement, and Government Relations. But before we get started, I'd like to share with you a few housekeeping details that will help all of us engage this dialogue. First, this event is being broadcast on Zoom webinar, which means that your camera and your microphones will be turned off for the entire session. But if you'd like to engage the panelists or our team behind the scenes, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. This event is also being recorded and will be uploaded to the DIEP YouTube channel, and closed captions will be available. And finally, at the end of our dialogue today, you will be provided a feedback link to help us improve this program and to offer any suggestions for future events. Today, our panelists will engage a dialogue about resiliency in the APIDA community with the help of our moderator, Dr. Chi-Chung Keung. But before we get to that, I'd like to introduce our Cal State Fullerton President, Fran Verjee, who is here to offer opening remarks. President Verjee, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Catherine. Good morning, everybody. Or it's not afternoon yet, I don't think. So good morning. Welcome to our final Titan Table Talk of the year, Resilience in the Asian Pacific Islander Desi American, or as we like to call it, the APIDA community. This event is part of our series to celebrate Cultural Heritage Months at Cal State Fullerton. An important observance. We hope that these series have shed some light on the cultural celebration months, but also allowed us some time and space to discuss topics and issues that are impacting for each of our communities represented, but really for all of our communities. I'm really honored to be here with you and grateful for the Titans that make these events possible, especially to Bobby and Catherine and our tremendous team in diversity, inclusion, and equity programs, to the Office of Alumni Relations, to Government and Community Relations, to the real team that puts this together. I'd of course like to thank our amazing moderator today, Chi-Chung. You're amazing, and I'm so glad that you're here with us to do this, and our panelists, Dr. Jo Currie, who's 38 years of educational career with 30 years in the community colleges, but more importantly, 8 additional years at Cal State Fullerton. We are so lucky to call her our own. Quyen Tien, our Titan alumna, who was the first female in her family to graduate college. She and her parents were Vietnamese refugees who ended up in Australia. She wrote a wonderful book, an amazing book about her ever-changing identity called, and I love this, Don't Pinch. I love that title. And Tom Clark, a proud 2-time Titan alumnus, who is an assistant vice president at Oak Tree Capital, a powerhouse financial institution, as well as a part-time instructor right here on campus in our Department of Economics. And finally, I want to thank each of you who are listening for being part of this Titan Table Talk as we discuss resilience in the APIDA community. You know, this year's Titan Table Talk themes of resiliency is an important one for all of our communities. And as with many of our communities we've honored this year, resilience is a word that truly represents the APIDA community. It's sort of coin of the realm, if you will. I guess what I'm trying to say is that in the midst of a global pandemic, many, if not all of our marginalized communities were also faced with the battling of our nation's true underlying plague in so many ways, and that's racism and discrimination. And the APIDA community was no exception. As we watch the news media, I continue to be troubled and still continue to be troubled, but today by the ongoing hate crimes that continue in all our communities across our nation, but especially in the APIDA community in the form of anti-Asian hate. This past January, NBC reported finding that hate crimes targeting the Asian American community in the United States have reached unprecedented levels. The compilation of hate crime data published by the Center for Study of for Hate and Extremism revealed that anti-Asian hate crimes have increased by 339% in the last year, compared with the year before, with New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles and other big metropolitan areas surpassing their record numbers in 2020. So that makes you ask, where are we today? Where do we go from here? What are we doing? How do we face this challenge and attempt to turn the tide? And it's a daunting question, without a doubt, one for which there's not one clear answer, not one clear solution. That said, I think one possible solution, one possible approach in addressing this issue is to take a page out of history, out of our history books, to examine the way in which the APIDA community has handled these issues like this in the past, but also how our entire community has done so, and maybe use that for a template for the issues that we're facing today. Well, what am I alluding to? One might say that I'm actually alluding to the past and continuing resilience of the APIDA community, the topic of our discussion today. The history of the API community in this nation is replete with examples of resiliency of our API community in the face of discrimination, prejudice, marginalization, being seen as the other. And in this instance, when I speak of resilience, I'm really talking about referring to this community coming together first as a community, and then with the greater community, and boldly stepping up in front of adversity to advocate and confront for change. On our campus, we recently heard perhaps the best example of this from our amazing speaker on campus last week, George Takei. We had the joy, and it really was a joy and a privilege, of hearing from George Takei, a famous actor, an amazing advocate and author, speaking to our campus community last week about his incredible book and our campus one book read, They Called Us Enemy. In his graphic novel, he writes about and he illustrates his family's experiences in being forced to live in Japanese internment camps during World War II after the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor. During his talk, he was specifically asked a question. He was asked about the reaction of not only the Japanese community, but our entire nation, our entire community during the dark times of history, that the stain, I think it is, on our country. In response, he said something that I found it profound. He shared that democracy only works when we use our collective voice to stand in the gap to protect and defend not only ourselves, but others. Democracy only works when we stand together, that we link arms and we hold each other accountable and we empower each other to make change. And as an example of this, George spoke of a successful campaign by what started out as a handful of brave young Japanese Americans who were elected officials who, in the aftermath of World War II and the Japanese internment, engaged us as citizens and as a nation, forcing us, challenging us to address and rectify, as I said, the stain on our record of our history of our nation. And as George pointed out, resilience was really the coin of the realm during those days of internment. But the story didn't end there. In the aftermath of the war, this group of Japanese American legislators worked without end to bring together a coalition of Americans to address this injustice. During the commission hearings that were held as part of this effort, George Takei testified before Congress, and in his remarks, he reminded lawmakers that democracy is only as strong or as fragile as the people who make it so. He, along with several others, took a stand to right this wrong, to fight for the true democracy that our country stands for and that we believe in. What were the results of that effort? These efforts at resilience, of bringing our entire nation back together to face our past? Well, the results were astounding. A formal apology from the President of the United States and restoration payments, token as they might have been, to all surviving internees. as I said, small recompense for the injustice that was done. But as George Takei pointed out, an amazingly powerful symbol of right overcoming wrong, of justice, of a coming together. So what do we learn from this example of resilience, this amazing example of resilience? What do we take away, not only as the API community, as the APIDA community, but as a larger community, a community dedicated to justice, equality, equity, and care and love for our citizens? For me, the takeaway is the power of civic engagement, the power of coalition building, the power of the willing to come together as a people, as a community, to fight for what is right and for taking care of each other. The resilience to stay the course and build community out of disharmony and marginalization, to bring together a community that is willing to be the change that we dream of. And I guess that is why I remain personally committed to these forums, to speaking out, to recounting the resilience of the APIDA community, yes, but even more to showing that this is what can be achieved when that resilience is of an even larger community, standing together, supporting each other, while honoring difference, focusing on how much we have in common. Here at Cal State Fullerton, nearly 25% of our Titan community identify as part of the APIDA community, making us one of the largest API campuses in California, if not the country. We as a community, as a whole, as a united community, we must use our collective voice to advocate where we can and where we should, to advocate for equity, inclusion, social justice, common care, for joy for all of us. And as I reflect back on the past 2 years of changes in our nation, in our state, and even on our campus, I'm even more convinced that locking arms and standing shoulder to shoulder is the very best way to navigate the world. The APIDA community has shown us this power by forging the strength of fighting for a better tomorrow, for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's what we need today, even more than ever. And at Cal State Fullerton, I commit to you that we will continue to step out of our comfort zone, to honor diversity, and create the inclusive and equitable community that we wish to be and we wish to see beyond our campus borders. Today, as you will hear some amazing stories from our different panelists. They will illuminate, they will inform, and I have no doubt they will inspire you. Some will also arm you with tools to break down barriers of ignorance, while others might share challenges that they have faced. And as you listen to this, I ask you to think critically. I ask that you commit to hold yourself accountable. I ask that you consider, as we finish today, what might I do in the future, tomorrow, next week, next year, to stand with and for our API community, our APIDA community, and all our communities. How might we be the change we hope to see in the world? In order to do this most effectively, we have to work together for this common good. Because we all win when we learn, when we share, and when we partner to make a difference. Simply put, we are better together. This, in so many ways, is the embodiment of sustained resilience, the topic of our conversation. The resilience we seek and need to build for the tomorrow that we dream of. So thank you for being here. Thank you for actively listening. And thank you to our panelists. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thanks so much.
Thank you, President Virgie, for sharing this space with us and for setting us up to engage this dialogue with one another. As I mentioned, our conversation will be moderated today by Dr. Chi-Chung Keung. Dr. Keung serves as the Director of News Media Services at Cal State Fullerton and also serves on the team of Strategic Communications Media Relations Unit that is a resource for both the media and our campus community. Please give a warm welcome to our friend, Dr. Chi-Chung Keung. Take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Ward, and for that warm introduction. And thank you, President Virgie, for your commitment and advocacy for diversity, social justice, equity, and inclusion. We are indeed blessed to have you as a friend and leader here at Cal State Fullerton. I want to extend a warm welcome to our Titan Table Talk today on resiliency within the Asian Pacific Islander Desi American community. As Dr. Ward mentioned, I am Chi-Chung Keung, and I will be your moderator for today's conversation. And I am joined today by a panel of guests who are excited and ready to talk about our community. But before I introduce our panelists, let me pause and ask you this question. What does resiliency mean to you? Last year, I had the privilege of joining a book club in reading the bestseller, A Resilient Life, You Can Move Ahead No Matter What, by bestselling author Gordon MacDonald. In his book, MacDonald used the backdrop of a runner to talk about life and define resilience as, quote, the courage and ability to get up when you fall, to keep running when you're bone weary, and to keep your eye on the goal, even in the murkiest moments. Today, we have three panelists who will share their stories of courage and resilience. We hope that their stories will inspire you to keep running, even when you are bone weary, and to never lose sight of the goal. So let me introduce our three panelists. Leading off, I have Tom Clark. And as President Virgie mentioned, Tom is an assistant vice president at Oak Tree Capital, where he works in the control room. He also teaches part-time at Cal State Fullerton, and his previous roles include positions at Bank of California, Zurich, the Hartford, and Southern California Edison. Tom loves Cal State Fullerton so much that he not only got one, but 2 degrees. He has a Bachelor of Arts and a Master's of Arts in Economics from Cal State Fullerton. We also have Quyen Tien. Quyen currently is a design recruiter for Stripe. She graduated from Cal State Fullerton in 2015 with a degree in broadcast journalism. And as President Virgie mentioned, she was the first female college graduate in her family. Quyen's parents are Vietnamese refugees who luckily ended up in Australia, where Quyen was born. Quyen grew up in a small suburb on the west side of Melbourne before moving to America when she was in middle school. Quyen's background gave her the strength to embrace her ever-changing identity and even wrote about it in her personal memoir, which President Virgie mentioned, Don't Pinch. Today, Quyen works and lives remotely in the mountains with her partner and their German Shepherd cattle dog. And then finally, we are honored to have Dr. Jo Currie joining us today. Dr. Currie's career includes over 30 years in the California Community College system with 8 additional years here at Cal State, in the Cal State University system. Dr. Currie retired in 2011 from Coast Community College District, where she served as chancellor. She also served as president of Coastline Community College prior to her chancellor role. Currently, Dr. Currie is serving as distinguished faculty at Cal State Fullerton and devotes herself to full-time leadership development. Let me add this personal note. When Dr. Currie was at Coastline Community College, she was the first Asian college president that I had ever met. She helped me realize that it was possible for an Asian to become a college president. As you can imagine, she quickly became an inspiration. And when I started working at Cal State Fullerton 7 years ago, guess who was the first one to come up to me and ask, so Chi-Chung, when are you going to start your doctorate? Through her encouragement and support, not only did I start and completed my doctorate, but Dr. Currie became my mentor and eventually my dissertation chairperson. So welcome to all our panelists. And so I'm going to have some questions for all of you. And let me start with the first one. The question is, how has your story shaped how you work, how you do your work, and engage with the APIDA community? And Tom, let me start it off with you.
Sure. So I think my story kind of ties in with everything. I dealt with some significant health issues over the course of my time at Cal State Fullerton. And the support system that came from the professors and some of my friends that I gained during my journey had really tied in and made me really grateful for having the support system to go through these health problems. And, it helped me get through a very difficult situation. So coming out of that, being able to kind of give back to Cal State Fullerton by being a professor and being involved in events like these has really helped.
All right. Thanks, Tom. And Quyen, same question.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. As a recruiter, I always think about the times when I was applying for internships, trying to find a part-time job. Right when I turned 18, it was time to find jobs, whether it was on Craigslist or the OC Register. And so that was always important to me. And knowing how hard it was to write a resume or go through an interview process, now that I'm on the other side of the table, I always try to give feedback. I try to give pointers on resumes. I do a lot of interview prep calls with candidates before they go through a huge panel of interviews, and giving them a cheat sheet. Here's a question that they might ask, or here's how to best prepare or answer this question. So knowing how hard it was and where I am today, it makes me feel like we're full circle again. And so if I'm able to provide any type of insight or advice as I go along the way with my candidates, that's what I do best.
Thank you, Quyen. And Dr. Currie, how about you?
Okay, well, my personal story is a Chinese immigrant. I came here in my teenage years with my sister, just the two of us, and we lived in a very downtrodden ghettos, if you will, in the Midwest, in Ohio. It's not here in California. So coming here with absolutely nothing and no family support, that is a story of resilience, as I reflect on it and when you were asked the question. And also the question revolving empowerment. I think that my experience when I started my career in higher education was actually with the refugees, helping the Southeast Asian refugees to start their life. And from there to share a seat at the table with my peer APIDA colleagues. And those stories with Southeast Asian refugees to my APIDA colleagues in leadership roles are filled with inspirational as well as disappointment stories of struggle that the APIDA community has had in gaining this legitimate and recognized voice. So my space and passion in leadership development, I realized that my own lived experiences from those humble days actually has been very, very rich days for my life and also for the APIDA communities. So that's lasting inspiration. And I hope that also means empowerment means a responsibility, a sense of having that agency for change to have different kinds of narratives that may be from decades ago where we are today. So this is really why I engage in APIDA empowerment in my leadership development programs, work through Leadership Institute for Tomorrow, and partnering with other institutions that share the same passion. So for example, I host with National Asian Pacific Islanders Council with APIDA CEO circles that we do, and APIDA Vice President, Deans, and Director circles to help them to lead and into the pipeline. Because like you, if I were your first one, it was also when I first met and saw Evelyn Wong, the first ever Asian president, in my own presence, that I understood the power of possibility. So I understand the importance of those role models and putting, leaders like Quyen, like Tom, in front of everybody to be inspirational and to be very empowering.
Dr. Currie, let me follow up with you with your story too, because you touched upon this a little bit. So what has your story taught you about the power of resiliency?
Oh my goodness. Has taught me a lot, actually. And in addition to being the immigrant, I'm also a female Asian American here. It taught me that power, first of all, is a very important thing to recognize that you have power. All of us have power. And to understand the impact of that power can make, and to learn the skills to use the power wisely, timely, and lastly, lovingly using power. So resiliency is something else, but having resiliency gives you that power. So to me, they're all related. My takeaway from my own story about resiliency is this: dealing with changes as an immigrant with language, culture, poverty, and so many more things early in my life that I can't even name them all in those first years of my life here in this country, gave me the practice of building my adaptive muscle. Those muscles, in turn, gave me the innate power of being resilient. It takes practice. So those adaptive practices that I had to do gave me the power. So sometimes we don't want to do what we have to do, but actually those are the moments that give us the practice. So those muscles in turn gave me the innate power of being resilient. And because I can adapting to highs and lows and the different, or those shocking and maybe sometimes very painful moments in life, has been indeed very powerful, empowering, and those came from resiliency.
Thank you, Dr. Currie. Now, Quyen, kind of thinking about those adaptive practices that Dr. Currie mentioned, how has your own story and then growing up in Australia taught you about the power of resiliency?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to have such great parents. They came to Australia, they escaped a war-torn country, and they ended up on boats and sailing, where I was lucky enough to be born in Australia. And growing up, we didn't live in a very nice neighborhood, but when you're a kid, it's your home. You enjoy it, you have your friends, your family, so you don't know any better. But knowing where my parents have come from made me think about how I need to prioritize having a different life. I needed to take school seriously. I need to be a good person in my community. I needed to give back where I could. And my parents did a great job of reminding us of how lucky we are to have a roof, because they didn't have one previous to moving or sailing to Australia. But they always instilled good principles in us, good morals, how to do the right thing. If you see someone littering, you can pick up their trash. If you see someone on the street, say hello, good morning, just very simple practices that I've learned at a very young age. And my dad actually went back to school, and he graduated with his bachelor's degree when he was 35. And at the time I was 5. So seeing him learn a whole new language, which is English, and going back to get his degree, being in a room with younger students, made me feel like, oh, like I can do this. Like if my dad can do it, I can do it as well. And my mom did the same. She picked up English. And so growing up, it was important for us to adapt to our new surroundings and to take advantage of those opportunities, whether they were in the community, educationally, or even in society, as we went around to adapt to our new life.
Thanks, Quyen. I love how you bring your family in as part of the motto that you have. And Tom, how about you? About how have your story kind of led you to the power of resiliency?
Sure. So I think, so for some context, I wanted to tell you guys a little bit how I got to Cal State Fullerton over 14 years ago. I'm from a small town in northeastern Pennsylvania. I decided that I wanted to come to California to school. I was looking at schools in Los Angeles and San Diego, and I looked at a map and I saw Cal State Fullerton kind of in the middle of those. So I decided, why not? Why not drop by for a campus tour at Cal State Fullerton? And sort of what ended up happening was I got here a little bit early. It was me and my mom, and we were wandering around campus on a Friday and ran into a student who can tell we were kind of lost and wandering around aimlessly. And he took the liberty of kind of walking us around campus and showing us around to the different buildings and everything. So the long and short of it all was I basically decided that I wasn't going to go to Cal State Fullerton, that I was going to go to school back in the Northeast to Drexel University, which is in Philadelphia. And at the very last day where I had to make it like an actual decision, I was like, you know what? I want to go to California. And Cal State Fullerton was my choice. And it ended up being a really great decision. I spent the 4 years in undergrad here, and I had an amazing time. And this all ties in because I eventually started graduate school here in 2017, which is kind of where my story of resiliency starts in my last semester or my last year of graduate school at Cal State Fullerton. I was working on my thesis and the capstone class in the graduate program. I presented my thesis proposal to my committee, and basically they said it would be very difficult to finish in the semester. I would likely need 2 semesters. And right in the middle of that all, I got sick. I started having shortness of breath. I was weak and tired all of a sudden, and I spent 10 days in the hospital. The diagnosis at the time was pneumonia. So they discharged me, and I, even several weeks later, was not feeling right. And I recall this moment vividly because I was in the business building in the computer lab, and I got a call from my doctor saying, your blood work's positive for a very rare, complicated autoimmune disease called MDA5 dermatomyositis, which involves rapidly progressive lung disease. This was right at the beginning of the semester, and I wanted to finish. I wanted to get through in that semester because I thought it was critical because there was so much uncertainty that was going to be involved. And my thesis chair worked tirelessly to help me through the administrative process of finishing my thesis and turning around comments at odd hours and answering all of my questions. And it turns out that this all played a very critical role in sort of my professional outcomes later on in life. But he helped me. I finished in 2019. I finished the graduate program. And then shortly after was a whole slew of medical issues. So I ended up having to move back to the East Coast to get treatment at Johns Hopkins. I had several lung surgeries and surgeries on my legs, knees, shoulder. And it turns out that, I started to get better in the middle of last year. And I got a call from the department chair at Cal State Fullerton asking me to if I was interested in teaching in the fall semester of 2021. And that was a motivating factor for me to get better faster. So I worked tirelessly to get better, with also amazing support from my family, my mom and my sister and my dad, who got me through this ordeal. And I guess this all ties in with resilience. And I don't find this, or I don't consider this, and I don't tell the story to be inspirational or consider it, some act of resilience. But for me, the story is about an example of how small gestures of kindness, like showing someone around campus, or going a little bit above and beyond, like my thesis chair did, in turning around comments quickly, being responsive, and really helping me through the process. Without all of that, I would actually probably just got back to school and graduated, in fall of 2021, and would be in no position to be able to teach. And the second thing is sort of having a strong support system in place enabled me to be resilient. So those are things that I really try to bring to the classroom. and keep those things in mind when I'm dealing with students that, maybe dealing with some challenge of their own. And if I can offer even 1/10 of the support that I got from the people around me, that, even if I'm only making a difference for one student, that, teaching is worth it. If I can make a difference even for one person.
Yeah, Tom, thanks for sharing your story. And I love the fact that you brought up that sometimes the small gestures are the one that makes such a huge difference. And Quyen, I'm going to ask you this next question, or have you started off, because there are so many on this webinar that are part of the PIDA community, or who are very interested in supporting the PIDA community. And so, what would you want other members of the community know, or how would they work with the APIDA community to know about the power of resilience within the community? How would you see that in terms of how can they better work with the APIDA community?
Yeah, I think it's just showing up. So for all of you who showed up today to listen and to be present with us, that's huge. And to be invited to this webinar was huge for me too. I always try to plug that in every time I'm out in the community. I know things are virtual now, so it's different, but in person, whether it's being a part of nonprofit organizations and volunteering in your community, some different companies will have their own organizations of having time off for volunteer work, or being part of so many different programs that you can do in your workspace and give back. So I think showing up is super important. When I was at my previous company, I was a part of a group where we went around San Francisco. We went to schools. We were playing basketball. We were painting with students. And it was just such a fun time. And it probably meant more to us than to the students to be out there on campus and just running around and being creative and investing in artwork, etc. So where you can be involved is a huge part of being there for your community. And to that end, if you're unable to, there's so many resources, movies, books that you can educate yourself on. I know that there is a huge community out there that's putting together, here are books that you can read, here's a book club, here's a movie club. So those are the different ways that you can be involved. And specific to my field of recruiting, it's important for me to remember that not everyone goes to four-year college. There are so many great candidates out there who go from boot camps or who go to boot camps, different programs that I could recruit from. I can certainly go through the groups that are underrepresented historically too, and try to source and pull different candidates from there. And then another part is just hosting different events at my office when we did have in-person meetings, and inviting community members to just come in and to get to know us, get to know the industry, the field of finance or technology, etc.
All right, great, thanks. I love it. Just show up is the first step. Dr. Currie, you work a lot with leadership development. So what would you say in terms of how can people experience the power of resilience within the APIDA community?
Well, Chi-Chung, I believe deeply in the strength-based model. So I think regardless of who you are working with, the first principle is to look for the strength in that person, in that community. The APIDA communities are communities of resilience. In my opinion, the APIDA communities in the United States have always demonstrated this resiliency throughout our history in this country. So there's been the political ups and downs throughout history, and the APIDA communities have had a long history since the 1800s of all different sorts of atrocities. We have legislations that is absolutely exclusive, right? Like the Chinese Exclusion Act. There's a lot of atrocity that has happened to the APIDA communities. And certainly most recently, our president mentioned in his speech about the pandemic, the backslashes, and most recently the countless of and increasing anti-Asian attacks. So how do we work with the community is really, first of all, ourselves as a PIDA person, as PIDA community, to really recognize, being aware, being mindful, the strength that we have within ourselves. And then having that introspection, I think, is very important. And then for others to really see not the Asian community as a weak, who can be bullied, who could be attacked. I think sometimes that's the perception of the Asian communities. And I think that is something that absolutely has to be turned around, that we have to look at ourselves as a strong community. We have to look at ourselves as a community of resiliency, and also helping others to see the strength when they don't see the strength in the PIDA community. And so I think that we have always been taught to reflect, and the reflection of us as a community is important. We had so many great teachers of Gandhi and Buddha and Confucius have emphasized the strength that comes from introspection of reflection. So I can name on and all the different strength that the APIDA community has. That's our jewel, that's our asset.
Thank you, Dr. Currie. So we have show up, we have strength. So it looks like the S's are wild. Tom, what do you have to add to this whole discussion on how do we contribute to the APIDA community?
I would say, really step up and just really be a support system, or be part of a support system for as many people as you're able to, because you never know how profound an impact you're going to have. So like when I was saying earlier, my story about my thesis chair, going above and beyond for me, that had a profound downstream impact on my, professional development and career, because I was able to just graduate and get done on time. And, before I had to deal with, separate health issues. So it was critical that, he went kind of above and beyond. And that's really what I try and do, with students that are undergraduate students that I work with now. So doing things like, meeting with them to help them apply for jobs, or putting in contact with recruiters at certain companies to try and help well position them when they leave Cal State Fullerton, like the professors that I had did for me. I think that's critical. If you can, if you're in a position to help someone, I think you should do everything in your power to do it.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Tom, I'm going to stick with you because earlier you shared about your own health challenges. And many of us went through the pandemic, and there are a lot of that basically a lot of people suffered during the pandemic, and health was probably one of the main areas. But what life lessons helped you as an individual and as a professional in your work to manage and keep managing through a pandemic?
I think humility is one thing that really came out of all of this. So being someone who had to rely on other people for a lot of basic things like getting up to go to doctor's appointments, I had to rely on my family, on my friends to help me get through all of it. So managing all that through the pandemic, and I worked for most of it. I did take a 6-month leave of absence from work to help take care of some of the medical issues, but being in a position now to look back and really help people, and having some of the health issues behind me, I really just want to continue to do that.
Okay. And Dr. Currie, how about you in terms of just personally and professionally? What were some of the things that you've learned to manage during a pandemic?
Wow, so much. Every crisis my culture has taught me is an opportunity. And of course, my first lesson when we started the pandemic about enduring this, being able to, lock down in your house, right? Don't go anywhere. This is pre-vaccination days. And I remember my mother said, speaking of mother, everyone has family history. So I suggest that you look into your family histories of resilience, and every history is the greatest teacher one could have, and it starts with your own family. So my mother's history was right away, she shifted my mindset. We were talking about, how hard it is, right, staying at home. And she says, what's so hard about that? She went through the Second World War. And every day is probably very much like what the Ukrainians are experiencing. She says that we had to abandon the house and run as fast as you can into the mountains. And then we stayed in caves to, avoid the bombing. And so she said, sometimes you were in the caves for a long, long time. And she said, that is for years and years. So for us to staying here in the house for a shorter period of time, months, and even the duration that we have, she says, this is nothing. You're in the comfort of your home. So, right, everything is relative. So that is a story of shifting my mindset. Yes, this isn't so hard at all when you start thinking about how hard it is. So I think that our history has, full of these lessons for me to think about how the pandemic affect our work. And for me, I have learned so many new tools that I did not know before. I am a very people center. I like to be with people. That's really what gives me joy and energy in my work on a daily basis. So when I had to be at home and just connecting people through Zoom, that was quite an adjustment for me. But what I found is this: the new tools I have gained that I never knew how to even, use them. Zoom was non-existent, wasn't on my radar. And all the different new tools, technology mediated new tools that I am still able to engage and bring people to my home through this medium, and different kinds of engagement tools that I have learned. I have found that truly we find new exciting tools, capacities that we may never thought we had before. That's one that I have learned. Two is I have found that I've always said, think global and act local, right? But with the pandemic, what I have found is with these new tools, I am actually able to connect very globally, very easily. And there's a lot of action that we can do at the global level, in addition to the local level. So the pandemic has really opened my eyes, opened my capacity, if you will, to do my work more efficiently, effectively, and also expand the range of impact. And that is not to say that I don't miss the in-person. So every opportunity I have, I like to still be in person, but the horizon is different now. The possibilities are also different now. And so that's how I have adjusted my own mindset and my own capacity under the pandemic.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Currie. You mentioned about the global aspect, and I want to kind of give Quyen a chance to share too, because as difficult as we thought it was in California, I have friends in Australia, and they were saying Australia was almost like a prison state in terms of lockdown and curfews and all that. So give us a perspective too, Quyen, from your perspective of what how did you manage during the pandemic in Australia?
Yeah, I know a lot of my friends and family were going to the grocery store only once for about 20 minutes. And they could only exercise within like a 5-kilometer radius, etc. But at the end of the day, we stayed connected. And it's what Tom was mentioning, just step up when you can, like make sure that you keep in touch with them. You try to help from afar, you keep them sane, whether it's jumping on a Zoom or FaceTiming and playing games online together. There's so many different ways that we can stay connected virtually. So that really helped everyone stay in the loop of communication, even though they were in lockdown. And then I think for myself in my work environment, it's having a more humanistic approach when I'm in my team meetings, when I am chatting with candidates, the first thing we check is like, how are you doing? Just not about work, not about your projects or deadlines, but just how are you doing? Like, how was your weekend? How are you mentally and physically? You can't assume that everyone is okay, especially in this time frame. So checking in on them frequently. I know this morning, something very tragic happened in New York. So the first thing we talked about was, hey, for all of you based in New York, are you okay? Did you commute into the office? Are you safe? Are you like, how are you feeling? Like, I bet you're very anxious. And that was the first thing that we talked about this morning. And so calls and meeting aside, my team does a really good job of just stepping up and checking in for each other. If someone needs a day off, I think a lot of times we take off days when we're physically ill, but what if we're mentally ill? And so if someone isn't in the right mental headspace, we're very open of, hey, like take this time to yourself, like, I'll take this call, I'll take this meeting. We can always reschedule things. It's not the end of the world if you can't make something, but just be in the right space so that you can show up for your team. So that's how that's shifted. And so whether it's family back home or family locally, it's just making sure that you're there for them, making sure that you're checking in frequently, following up to see if they're okay, if they weren't the week before. So that's how we're able to stay in touch with each other.
Okay, thanks. Quyen, I want to follow up with you because I want to transition a little bit in terms of just career too. So as you reflect on your own personal story, how has your own personal story of resiliency helped shape your career in terms of getting to where you are now? And as a follow-up question, what advice might you go give to those who share similar adversities?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my parents again. So shout out to them. But they've always worked hard. They've had jobs in factories, sewing. I mean, they've run the whole gamut of different professions in their lifetime, and seeing how hard they've worked to have a roof and food, and I have lunch money for school every day, has always been my reminder that I need to work hard. And if I don't get a job interview, if I fail something, it's a learning lesson to do better. And so with that being said, when I was in high school, both of my parents were unfortunately unemployed, and it was just timing. It wasn't to anyone's fault, but that happens naturally. And so I knew that I had to get a job as soon as possible. I knew I had to contribute my paycheck to electricity bills or water bills, etc. And that gave me a sense of ownership. Like, I cannot just rely on my parents. Like, I am part of this family. I also need to contribute. This is my own attitude. I can't just go through it not worrying about this. It's all of our responsibilities to support each other as a family. So that's always given me a good backbone of, whatever happens, you have to keep trying. And in the same respect, a couple of years ago, I was also laid off. And as discouraging as it was, right in the beginning of the pandemic, I knew that I couldn't give up. I had to continue to apply. And at that time, companies were not hiring. They were pausing. They were laying off even more people in their organization. But I counted my interviews. I think I had about 60 different interviews. And luckily, a company said, yes, like, we need you for your specific skill set. And like, here's what we're going to do. So never giving up and not feeling discouraged anytime something doesn't go your way is really important to remember, because if you give up, it's over. You got to just keep on trucking.
If you give up, it's over. Wow. Profound. Tom, how about you in terms of how has your career been shaped by resiliency, and what advice might you give to others?
Yeah, so I think a lot of things changed for me over the pandemic and during the health issues that I encountered. I think in the beginning, what sort of set me apart and helped me advance career-wise was that I really took on whatever projects or work that no one else wanted to do. So I think that would be one kind of piece of advice that I would give to folks who are just finishing, undergraduate school and moving into the professional space, is that, you're not necessarily trained one for one in school for what you're going to be encountering in the workplace. So be willing to learn, and be willing to do work and try and solve problems that you've not necessarily encountered before. Don't kind of let the knee-jerk reaction I don't know how to do this, scare you away. Really lean into things and set yourself apart by doing all the work that no one wants to do. Be willing to roll up your sleeves to try and get projects done and get things across the finish line, and do extra where you can. With that said, moving towards sort of the pandemic era and dealing with my health issues, I would say, when you do encounter adversity, or you encounter a challenge, make sure that it's really a challenge. Don't sweat the small stuff. Don't lose sleep over things that don't really matter that much. Maybe if someone says something to you in a way that they're demeaning or whatever, don't always internalize it and let it stress you out. Let it go and let it roll off your sleeve a little bit, to try and move forward as best you can. So I think those are two very different experiences that I had, sort of pre-pandemic, in the frame of mind that I had of, just get the job done. But also, there are other things like friends and family and personal relationships that need to get built and that are extremely gratifying. So it's not just about work all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, Tom, I also appreciate you mentioning that sometimes we do the things that no one else wants to do.
Yeah.
It makes us almost indispensable that way.
Yeah.
Dr. Currie, I want to ask you the same question too. Unlike Quyen and Tom, when adversity hits a president in a public institution, that adversity sometimes gets spread on the newspaper and in the 6 o'clock news and stuff like that. It becomes quite public. So I was just wondering, in terms of as you reflect on your career, how has resiliency helped shape you, and how, what advice would you give to those who are maybe following similar adversities?
I think you might find my advice funny, and that is, have failures often, but have them early. That helps, right? Because the stakes are a little bit lower. As if you are rising on your career, I cannot afford to make a mistake, because then too many lives at stake, right? When early on in my life, when I fail, it's on me. So that's why I say my first advice is have failures often and early. And it's because it makes you practicing what happens when a failure occurs. And have those kind of script ready, because we talk to ourselves when stuff happens. What is it that you're saying when you accomplish something? What is it that you're saying when things didn't go well, when you meet up with adversity? So my first big failure occurred early in my career. That's why, from my own experience, I know I was very fortunate to have those early in my career. And that was at I won't say where it is, but I was trying to start a multicultural center in the early 1980s. And I have to tell you, I was embarrassed, I was humiliated, all of those things that you can imagine in front of a lot of people. And I could have jumped into a hole and never came out again. But my culture taught me not to think in a very binary way. It's either or, right? Either you succeeded or you fail. And I don't think that way. So I don't think of failure as that. There's many, many lessons that I have learned from the great heroes of my culture. So I didn't see it as a failure, except an opportunity. This is where the Chinese word character of crisis is, that every time a crisis occurs, it's absolutely an opportunity. And I go back to what I said earlier. It's a mindset. It's, you have a prepared script. Oh, what an opportunity. And to reflect on what it is that I did wrong. If it didn't go well, figure out and approach it differently and move forward. And I mentioned Confucius a lot because Confucianism has a lot of influence in my life. And one of the things Confucius said is, our greatest glory is never failing, but in rising every time we fall. That is so true. And that's a script I have in my head, that when I fall down and I say, wow, the glory is about standing back up again. That's what I'm after. And if you make mistakes, we all do. But if you make mistakes and you don't correct it, that's the real mistake, is when we can't reflect. That's why I was also saying this ability to have introspection is critical. And I see good leaders, great leaders, and I'm not talking about leaders who wear titles. We are great leaders. Each one of us wear that title as a leader, leading ourselves, right? We're the captains of our own ships. So how do we lead? Leading by telling ourselves that we reflect and we improve. That didn't go well. I said the wrong thing. I didn't act quick enough. I didn't stand up for someone today. But how will we correct that? That's the key. So I have found in my own career, those who are able to understand that they're mistakes and move on and improve the next time, that's true resilience, okay? Because practicing those kind of muscles.
I just feel like my mind just blew up when you said, like, embrace the adversities. I mean, it just, because we go through life trying to avoid those minds, right? And
I have to say, I reflect on all the challenges I have in my life, because I lived the more decades than you have, right?
Yeah.
And I now truly understand. This has actually come to me, more than 2 decades ago. Is that, oh my goodness, if it wasn't for that challenge, I would not have learned this. If it wasn't for that particular failure, I would not have learned that. And so, if we knew that what challenges bring us, how it helps us grow and enrich and empower ourselves and give us new tools and capacities, we actually would be praying for challenges every day. And this is coming from a person who has lived through quite a few challenges, come to understand that. But I can tell you, in my younger days, when I was living through them, all I knew was the pain, right? All I knew was the terrible feeling of that sense of disappointment in myself, but able to pick it back up, able to stand up again. So that's because I was able to stand up and rise again. That really made those challenges different and valuable in life.
Wow, thanks. For all of you who are watching this webinar, I hope you're taking some good notes, and some of these thoughts and comments and suggestions are sticking with you. Please, if you have any questions, enter that into the Q&A section, and we'll make sure we'll have some time to answer your questions, or if you have comments or thoughts at that. And Dr. Ward will field those and then share them with us so that we can answer some of those questions. So thank you so much, Dr. Currie. That's I get it, but it's so uncomfortable to embrace or even welcome that, the adversities. But that's just so much wisdom from there. Tom, let me shift to you and ask, how has the pandemic shifted your approach in being able to do your work?
Yeah, so I think the one thing that the pandemic kind of forced, both from an employer standpoint, is that, really forced employers to be, trusting of their employees to be able to get the job done in an environment where everyone's working remote, and I think that has forced employees to need to be flexible, right? So there's no longer kind of this hard and fast wall between working a 9-to-5 job, which I feel like most people it's not for them. It's usually much longer and much more involved, and bringing that into your home, where it's much more difficult to detach from your work phone, from your laptop. So I think the pandemic has really forced us all to be a little bit more flexible, and also try and walk the fine line between separating out family time and times with your dog or your friends, and actually being able to do all that stuff while also working from home. So I think flexibility is kind of one thing that I really learned a lot about during the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we saw at Cal State Fullerton in many of our Zoom meetings. We got introduced to a lot of people's pets and surroundings, just because the fact that you felt like you were intruding in someone's, room and office or bedroom and stuff like that, because they're resuming from their home. So that flexibility is certainly well taken. Quyen, how about you? How has the pandemic shifted your approach in doing your work?
Yeah, I would say setting boundaries is important. And luckily for my team, everyone's calendar is visible. There are so many parents on my team. There are people who have their own lives, and it's so tricky to be in between. So oftentimes I'll say, do not schedule, I'm picking up my child, or I'm taking a walk, I'm drinking water. It could just be any type of block that I see, and you respect that because you don't know how busy their day is with tantrums at home or seeing dogs and children on Zoom, which we may have all seen. But having that level of respect for everyone that you work with, as Tom said, is important, and being flexible and understanding and setting boundaries. Just because you don't commute from work to work doesn't mean that you don't have a cutoff time. So making sure that you're having dinner and you're having time to yourself is really important. And another thing that I've picked up is therapy as well. And my company sponsors a certain subscription. And so every week I'll set aside time to talk to my coach. And I don't always talk to her when I'm having a bad day. I could be having a great day and I could tell her, like, here's how I've progressed since we last talked. And here's something that I'm working through that I need your help on. And having that soundboard there, that's not a part of your work or your family, just someone who's completely unbiased, has been a great balance for me to shift from work to personal to family to dog, etc. So making time for yourself and creating boundaries is a big piece that I've learned throughout this pandemic, and hopefully everyone else has as well.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Quyen. Dr. Currie, how about you?
I tell you, the pandemic has profound effect on the way that I have viewed the world and the people, in humanity in general, from the global picture to the local pictures where I work with our students. And I can use the words that had the most impact on me in thinking about how it applies to my work and how it's applied to at the global level. One is the word freedom. The freedom to work from wherever and however you work, right? And the freedom of what that means for me and versus you. When I gain the freedom, that means someone else didn't have the same kind of freedom where I perceive that freedom. And so that translates to how I think about our students. So this whole word of freedom under the pandemic has changed meaning for me. And it changed meaning for me because I look at the freedom under the justice and equity lens. It looks different under the pandemic context. And I think we work with students, we understand what that means. At the beginning, we say, oh, all of a sudden we understand who actually doesn't have access, who actually dependent, whose home environment is not conducive for learning anymore, right? That's very superficial, but it is real. It's the first condition for learning is your physical space is changed. So the pandemic, even more so than the physical space, there are so many equity issues that becomes visible under the pandemic context, whereas we were not able to see that, even though we were using the equity lens in a different kind of environment. So that has greatly impacted the way I think about education. Having been in education for decades, still the pandemic opened my eyes one more time to a world and how we actually can be truly outside of the box. We are very confined to the way we think. You know, the DNA of higher education hasn't changed a whole heck of a lot, really. We are very, very confined to inside a box thinking, inside higher education. And I could say that because I lived inside that box, up close and personal. So I think, and I hope that for me, my mind has completely opened up so much more because of pandemic in terms of our curriculum, our design, our delivery, and how every single thing impacts our students. And the last word, as my favorite area to look under, is the justice lens. We understand now from pandemic, so many contexts that there is no fairness, and how do we find it in the middle of pandemic? And the pandemic way of fighting this virus is very different. And I think about it from a APIDA point of view, for me, the Asian traditional medicine, because I went to my Chinese herbal doctor right away at the beginning where there's no vaccination, right? Doesn't seem like there's anything out there. I went and asked him, and he's 9th generation traditional medicine in his family. And he was looking at it, he says, oh, we have had pandemic for thousands of years. And he was very relaxed, and he said, but of course we have. But the Western way of treating what's happening with the pandemic is we want to have external, right? This is back to the strength-based model and what our capacity, we have tested our capacity under the pandemic, that we're looking for, in the Western thinking, medicine that's going to kill the virus. And what he taught me is, he says, how do you lean into your inner strength, what your body has been endowed with, strengthen that even further, and you can fight the virus from inside. That's a different philosophy, And so I look at that simple analogy to how do we lean into the tremendous amount of capacity we have been endowed with, the freedom of thinking that we have been endowed with. How do we find true justice because of what pandemic has revealed to us during this past, over 2 years, and we're still in the middle of that. And so it has changed the way that I absolutely do work, and have really changed many of the programs that I design in our leadership programs. So I am very thankful in many ways that I would not have discovered those new opportunities and new lens to look at freedom and to experience that in a very different way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Currie. The last couple of years has just been challenging for all of us, with the pandemic. And so, some of our attendees are asking the question, so how have you engaged within the APIDA community during these last 2 years? Dr. Currie, what do you?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness, it's given me new opportunities to be able to help the community right here from where I sit. Mm-hmm. And that's been a blessing. So in the last 2 years, we held many APIDA workshops. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned earlier, we host workshops on leadership development for the national APIDA community in higher education. And many, for example, the CEOs, the APIDA CEOs were talking about, you should remember 2 years ago, right, from George Floyd, and how do we deal with these issues of racial justice, equity, and all of that. And the APIDA CEO says that we all intersect differently. But the APIDA CEO said we intersect, we lead the campus as an APIDA CEO. That's a different positionality. How might we do that? We hosted circles, the Leadership Institute, which I direct. We hosted the monthly chat opportunities for APIDA to talk about how our intersections are different, right? They're talking about it from a leadership perspective, but we know that as individuals, we intersect with racial equities, with all these injustices that's happening the last few years that's vivid for us. How do we deal with that? So we held that. I started the monthly being interviewed on the Chinese radio. When anti-Asian attacks happen, people are looking for things. How do I deal with it when my mother doesn't want to go out the door anymore, right? Afraid of being attacked. My student, my Asian international student was a victim of anti-Asian crime. How do we help them? So we started I'm still going on every once a month. I do the radio for the Chinese community. I started holding, because I was asked to, and I'm glad to do it, to do workshops to help parents in their children's education process in the pandemic. How do they formulate a different kind of healthy Asian APIDA identity? They had questions about that when all these attacks toward the Asian community is happening here in Orange County. So I've been working with the Cultural Center, providing that. I've given to police chiefs. So in fact, I've given presentations to the Police Chiefs Association, helping them working with not just the Asian community, but multicultural communities. And I will be doing that again this summer for the Police Chief Association. So there are many things that we can do, large and small. Each of us contribute. That's the beauty of the APIDA community, because we come from a collectivist, right, culture. So we understand when communities come together, because that's part of our life. So I think this is the time when we need to really lean into that cultural strength that we've always had, is the community center, community anchored, community-based action is extremely powerful. It is when we are united that we understand we have a community that we belong to. We have power and we have strength to conquer whatever challenges that come to us, as long as we are together, unified in our diverse. And we have the first layer of diversity in the APIDA community. We're very diverse. So I think that's the beauty, and that's the lessons that we first learn from our own community.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Currie. And Tom, how about you? In terms of, over the past couple of years, how have you been able to engage within the APIDA community?
I think that the best example is interacting with undergraduate students and teaching them about, economics in the classroom. Many of our students at Cal State Fullerton are part of the APIDA community, and getting the opportunity to sort of teach them about something I'm very passionate about, and maybe, making them aware of kind of all of the things that are going on in the world today from an economic perspective, maybe that they weren't really aware about, and giving them the tools to be able to discuss those things when they leave Cal State Fullerton in the, the business world, and being able to discuss things like inflation and unemployment, are very valuable. And that's kind of one way I've been able to, engage over the past, maybe year or so as a part-time faculty at Fullerton.
Okay, good. And then let's down under. How does that? How have you been able to engage with the APIDA community in Australia, Quyen?
Yeah, I think it's being part of different resource groups, and there are so many out there. And lucky for me, being part of an international company, I get to be a part of Pride, Black Parents. There's so many different employer resource groups that I'm a part of, and it's about listening to what folks are feeling, what they're saying, what type of day they're having, if their community is impacted. Again, showing up, stepping up, all the S's that we went over today, and sharing your experience too. A lot of times we can be all experiencing the same thing, and it helps to comfort each other and know that someone else is going through what you're feeling. And so having those forums and sharing your story, such as we are doing today, and then even celebrating different parts of the experiences that we have, whether it's Lunar New Year, we had a photo contest of like, show us what you're doing today. And so there were like hundreds of submissions on one of our Slack channels of like, here's how I'm spending this day with my family. And it makes you feel more united. It feels like you have friends and family out there that you haven't met yet. So being able to be, again, present and being part of these forums and channels and resource groups has been a great way for me to stay in touch.
Oh, thank you, Quyen. So, Dr. Currie, we have a question that was actually asked directly to you, and it's highly personal. So I want to kind of give you space to answer this one. How do I ignore racial comments meant to hurt me? Dr. Currie, what are your thoughts? And how would you respond to that?
How do I ignore racial comments that will hurt me?
Yeah, meant to hurt you.
Oh, goodness. And I have had experiences confronting those very, very negative, very hateful racial slurs at me. And I think one of the things is to have the courage. And I think the courage is something that you have to practice. I can't say that I had that courage because, first of all, I remember when someone called me a name in my early days in the Midwest, I didn't even know what that meant as an immigrant. And later, when I come to understand what that is, then emotions starting to attach to it. And so for me, the first thing is really keep my emotions in check. That's my first reaction, is practicing having my emotions in check, because the first reaction is you're angry when these racial slurs are coming at you. And acknowledging, I practice a mindfulness, acknowledging this comment is making me angry in a split second. And just really acknowledging how you're feeling reduces the level of intensity. And we all know from recent examples of when people act out of anger, right? When things are said to you, we regret later if we don't have that self-constraint. Because my mother taught me this great lesson. She says, never let someone else's behavior or words change how you are going to behave. And she's been subjected to many things. So however she's been treated, she said, do the right thing. And the right thing is for that moment. It could be a teachable moment. It could be a moment that you stand up for yourself. But that courage to have that reaction, in a very positive reaction, is something that I have to prepare myself for. The last time I was called this, or so this happened, I was not prepared. But the next time, I'm better prepared. So what are the script that I have prepared myself to have my emotions in check? And then what is it, the words that I am going to say that is not mirroring the person who said it? I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever in my response. So it's that self-discipline, but it's a preparedness, right? For every occasion, how will you show up? Yes, you show up, but you also show up prepared. So having had instances where I didn't say anything and I didn't know what to say, I was angry, all of that culminated in telling me, I will not let that happen again. If I was silent when someone says, I will not let anger control me. I will not let this person hurt my own dignity by responding to we call it the little people. Whether you are a learner person is learning from the lessons of the past. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, while you were sharing that, it reminded me to my own childhood. And I still remember, I think it was in grade school, I had some big guy come up to me and says, hey, I want to meet you, Chi-Chung, after school. I want to kick your butt. And I'm thinking, like, what for? Like, I barely know you. And he said, yeah, because your people bombed Pearl Harbor. And it was, and you just kind of like, what, what just happened? Why did you, I'm not even Japanese. And it was just really confusing, but I internalize a lot of stuff. And I believe probably many of us, oftentimes we, you kind of keep things to yourself. And so I want to ask, maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Currie, and I'll ask the Quyen and Tom the same question. How, do you have any wisdom to speak up, to know when to speak up and when to say something, because our tendency is to just keep it in. And just any thoughts on, tips on not internalizing things?
Okay, this is the way I translate it. When you have internalized, someone gave you garbage. If you internalize that, then I actually just turned myself into a garbage truck. I took it in. So I refuse to be a garbage truck and dump your garbage somewhere else, right? So that's my own thinking about don't take anything garbage and internalize that. Then what am I going to do with the garbage? You just took someone else's garbage. So that's my first rule, is I am not willing to be a garbage truck. And the willingness to speak up and when not to speak up is the value. So I think about what is the value of speaking up? What is the impact of speaking up? And what is it that I am going to say? In my culture, there is a thing saying that illnesses go into your mouth by what you feed yourself with, and disasters come out of your mouth depending on what you say. So what you say does matter. And so what is it that you're going to say? Is it of value that to this person who said it to you? Is this a teachable moment? And does the person have a positionality to learn from that? I look at that as a proposition to say or not say. And there's also, I'm guided by many of my cultural teachings. One of the saying that I was taught is, sometime when you remain silent, endure just for that second, you avoid a storm completely. And sometimes in the moment that you think you're stepping back, you're actually moving forward. So a lot of times this is part of the perception of many who look at APIDA community as weakness, where that's actually a strength. It takes more courage sometimes not to speak, to refrain yourself, right? That actually is more strength in a lot of times than blabbering something out of anger, out of words that actually have rippling effect of negative impact, not only to your own personal emotional well-being, but to the emotional well-being of others as well. I think I'm going to stop there before I say too much.
No, thank you, Dr. Currie. And Quyen, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I know we have 4 minutes left, so I'll go quick, but something I've learned is to give yourself that period. If you need to internalize, worry, purge your emotions, like spend a few minutes just making sure you process that. Like, don't just keep it under the rug and have it come out later as a surprise. And you're like, I remember when I was mad at that situation. So take that time to process. And then once you're done, let it go. It's almost like a purge. And then the second thing is make sure you have a soundboard. If there's something that you're feeling, talk to someone that you trust, like, here's how I'm feeling, here's why I'm feeling this way, what do you think I should do? Like, can I get your opinion about this? Should I speak up or should I stay silent? Like, I just want your trusted opinion about it. So those are the two things that I would say. And Tom, if you want to take us home.
Yeah, sure. Kind of echoing what you said, Quyen. I mean, find an outlet, find someone that you trust and that, understands your thinking. For me, it's my mom. I go to her with all my problems. If I encounter something, a challenging situation in the workplace, and, I think I'm tempered enough to not respond in a way where I come off as, angry or sort of erratic, but maybe take that home for just a minute and have a conversation with someone I trust and get feedback, and then come back maybe with a plan to say, to maybe respond more intellectually and be able to kind of lay out your side of the argument. But yeah, my piece of advice would be to, don't internalize it, but maybe find an outlet, find someone that you can go to get some help and advice.
Well, Tom, Quyen, and Dr. Currie, just thank you so much for just your insights and wisdom. There's just so much there. I might have to watch it over again in the recording just to glean more. But thank you so much for your time and just for sharing with us. I'm going to let Dr. Ward kind of bring closure to our time together. So Dr. Ward, to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Keung. What an amazing hour and a half we had together. My heart feels full and I am so grateful. So thank you all for joining us for the Titan Table Talk on resiliency in the APIDA community. Special thanks to our moderator, Dr. Kern, for this dialogue on resiliency rooted in our histories, and to our panelists for being vulnerable and sharing with us your stories. Our partners, we'd like to also thank the Alumni Engagement, Government Relations, and of course, the Office of the President. If you are interested in information or joining the Asian American Pacific Islander Faculty and Staff Association, please see the website link in the chat and reach out there. We would love to have you join us. And don't forget that the Staff Development Center is open in College Park, 207. Come check us out. We'd love to see you there. And you can find details of all of our month's events in our April newsletter. Again, thank you for being part of this conversation, and we hope that you will join us next time. Thank you very much.